Okay, good news. The people online can hear us, so we can officially start while we're working on getting everything going. So tonight we're continuing that school conversation, but before we do that portion, there's been some changes that have occurred in the last month with the licensors moving to the state. And so we've invited a couple of them in, Becca and Rachel, to just help answer a couple of questions and give a little bit of information. Change is always hard, so more communication is always better. And I think that everyone, if you're Burleigh County, I know they sent out a communication to help let people know, but this is your chance to fire away any questions as well. So you guys have to use the microphone.
Hello, everyone. So I'm Becca.
Rachel.
I guess we figured we would just kind of start with a general overview of the redesign. So as you know, JD took a different job and didn't switch over to the state. So Rachel and I are the two that were assigned to the 3 areas of Dakota Central Human Service Zone, 3 Rivers Human Service Zone, and Burleigh Human Service Zone. So it'll be us two will be your go-to gals. How it's going to work, I guess, moving forward is we're each assigned a home. So we will be kind of your point of contact if we're assigned to your home throughout the duration of your entire license. So that'll be nice. It'll just be one person you'll still be communicating with. You might have questions on which one of us that is right now. And so we're kind of working through some of that. And you guys, hopefully we're trying to get emails out 90 days in advance prior to your guys' relicensing is our goal with the redesign. We kind of have a backlog happening right now. So we apologize for some of that, but yeah, you'll be hearing from one of us. And then once you hear from us, like I said, you will just be your point of contact. We are now going to be doing quarterly check-ins with our families, whether that's a phone call, a home visit, a Zoom meeting, whatever it is, just to check in and be a support. We want to make sure that your guys' needs are taken care of. Obviously, I hope the case managers are all doing that too. You know, that's their job too. But, you know, we want to be a support on our end because we know that the kiddos coming in and out of the homes is tough, emotionally, physically, all that, mentally. So I hear there's some questions on maybe just general questions about the redesign, how things are looking. Is there any specific questions you guys have that we can answer to just kind of ease the nerves? Home. Oh, yep. So Lori asked, where are we housed? So where are we going to be working out of? So we're both working out of our homes. We do have the option to kind of hotel at a place in Bismarck at this Child and Family Service Center, which is just north of the Capitol, but it's kind of in and out. There's no permanent place that we're housed. So from home. So who's our boss? So Bob Shook is he's kind of who we report to. And then the director of the whole new CFS licensing unit is Kelsey Bless from the state. So she's kind of our go-to lady if we have anything that needs to be higher than Bob. So
kind of looks like it's the different licensing areas. So there's 3 different lanes and 2 of them are licensing specialists. And there's 12 of us and they were divided up throughout the state. And then there's another lane that does the licensing of like the DVGR and like Youth Works, and that has different homes. So I think the color code is our different areas that we cover. Well, and that's, I guess, another that you bring it up. We don't have any printers. We're paperless now in our unit. So everything that we send to you, you can fill out and scan back, or a lot of the things will be just checking that it's your signature, and then you send it back to us. So no more paper. And I think they condensed some of the forms too. I'm new to licensing. I was a case manager for about 16 years with Morton County and 3 Rivers. So I'm learning it as well, but Becca is my mentor and teacher. So if I do anything wrong, it's her fault, because that's how she taught me.
I guess one last thing I wanted to mention, and I don't know what JD was doing prior, but with the training hours, so they're switching things up, or policy changed a little bit, I should say. And they are requiring, so 12 hours, that hasn't changed, plus the 1 hour of your annual fire safety training. But 6 hours need to be either in person, so like this, or a webinar, a live webinar. It can't be like a recorded and then you just watch it. You need to be on while it's going on. And then 2 hours of like diversity, equality, cultural awareness training. And so we realized that we need to offer more trainings if we're requiring these trainings. So we'll be giving grace to those people who obviously are relicensing in the next few months, and not requiring that, but just going forward, just so you guys know that that is the change, or a little bit of a change. And then that you guys just keep track of your training hours. I'm not sure if JD was keeping track for you or how that all works, but on a new form that was developed, you guys are required to kind of put in those hours and put in, you know, what it was, if it was virtual or in person, or what it was, and then the amount of hours. So just keep that in mind as you, throughout the year, as you do them, just jot it down. So when it comes time for relicensing, you're not having to go back and rethink it all. So just a heads up. I would say count it as your 2 hours, guys. That's what we've been doing. If you're truly here for the full 2 hours, you know, networking and being there for each other is kind of part of training itself, right? It's retention. So I would say count it as your full 2 hours. Yeah, so that's a big shift too. And I feel bad for our case managers, to be honest. We were the primary people that reached out to our foster parents because we knew you guys best, right? He knew you guys, he knew what would fit in your home. And so what happened now is there's a statewide foster parent list. So caseworkers from all over the state can access this list. So you guys may be getting a lot more calls from people outside of just Burleigh County because they have access to your name. They can see if you have a bed available. They can see, your preference ages. They're able, your phone number, obviously. And so that is open to everyone statewide. And so every county and agency is going to be responsible for finding their own placements. So you probably won't hear much from us as far as like, what's available. If we know you really well and we know what might fit, we sometimes still have caseworkers reaching out to us, and we'll give them a name or two if we feel like we know, there might be somebody open that's a good fit, but we won't be the ones calling or sending emails or anything like that. So
that check-in piece, if there's things going on in your life and you don't feel like you can take a placement or things are going on, that's the time. Even before that too, if you want to be put on hold or if you want to change your preference or anything like that, let us know, and then we can update that spreadsheet too, and so everyone can see that. There's a list for comments for things going on too, so just keep us. You can reach out to us, or there's also, I should say there's 4 lanes then, coordinators, and they're kind of the upfront people too for those new getting a license. They send out the initial paperwork, get you going with the background checks and that too. And we have just new CFS licensing at nd.gov, and then we have a phone number for them too. And it's like a calling tree, so if you don't get one person, it just goes to the next till you reach somebody. Yeah, once the coordinators get all that background check and that paperwork, then it's called a full kit, and then it gets assigned to one of us, and then we go out and do the license and the relicensing. Well, and those are good. We asked those same questions because I think when they talked about the redesign, of course, we'd want them to stay closer to home in their schools, families for the reunification piece. But and when you get those calls, feel free to ask those questions, and if it's not the answers or something you can't work with, it has to work for your home for it to be a successful placement. But kind of how it is, you can put, let's say they need a 5-year-old, there's a filter where you can put whose preference is for 5-year-olds, and then all the names come up. But you can also do it by zone, which I think workers will do first because they want to, they don't want to do that much traveling either. So I think they will start that way, but if there's nothing there, then they'll start branching out. Protective. Yeah, I think it's across the board, the case managers felt that way, like, oh, we're gonna lose all our homes. But I mean, and at the end of the day, you guys can choose who you take kids from. So, but yeah, I think it was a mix. I think everyone has reservations about it. I think there's going to be some growing pains.
It's good to meet you guys.
I'm going to make a very quick transition for the sake of time over to our guest speaker tonight, Danica, Director of Special Education for BPS. Okay, come on up. You've heard the rules already. You have to talk in the mic.
All right, well, here we go. So you guys, will you project? I know, please feel free to chime in at any point, ask any questions that you have, and we can totally deviate from what we have planned also up here. So this is really to inform you guys, and I want to reach your needs. I'm Danica Nelson, as we had already talked about. I am a mom of 3 kids. Our oldest is 26, who has an 8-year-old and almost 2-month-old. So grandma is another title that I wear. Dax, our oldest grandson, was born my daughter's senior year of high school. So also bringing in a little bit of a diverse perspective there. We have a 16-year-old who is an avid swimmer and a sophomore at Century High School. She keeps us on our toes with a lot of sass, but that's with age, right? 21, she'll be kind again. That's what I keep telling myself. And then we have a super sweetheart 5th grade young man. That seems hard to start to say, but Toby, and he will be rolling into Horizon Middle School. He is in football, basketball, wrestling is his dad preferred sport. My husband also coaches wrestling at Century, right? Patriots. And Toby's hoping to cross that one off his list as soon as he can get his dad at that point of being able to accept that. So we have 3 generations of Bismarck Public School Bismarck Public School students. And I always tell Dr. Hornbacher that he has many years of our family members to serve. So that's part of the why that we've dedicated so much time into education. My husband's also a former teacher. He taught in Mandan for 10 years. When the oil boom happened, moved out into the education safety field and is now the regional manager at Knife River. So kind of a diverse perspective that our family brings. So today, talking about special education, my journey with special education started in college. I was going into early childhood and kindergarten. Like, those were the oldest kids I wanted to work with. And one of my advisors along the way said, "Have you thought about special education?" And I said, "No, thanks. I'm good. I'm going to be a kindergarten teacher." And they're like, "No, I think you really should consider special education." And so I always credit special education passion to Dr. Liz Steer, is who one of my champions is. And then the other journey, detour, I sometimes giggle about is that my student teaching was at a high school in Minot. And I'm like, no, I can't teach high school kids. And then I have never taught anything but high school kids. So that was another passion. Taught at Century High School for 13 years, moved in as a special ed coordinator for about 6 years, and 3 years ago, the Jumanji, we joke about Jumanji game, started as a director. 5.5, 6 months later, COVID started, and it's been a wild ride ever since. So not sure what a normal year in special education administration looks like, but that's my journey up to this point. So thank you for having me tonight, and I just want to give you guys a huge shout out for all you do, because we see the benefits that being foster care parents really plays in the role of students in their behavior and academic side. So thank you, huge kudos to all. So what is special education all about? As we start to think about what drives, it always goes back to federal law, right? So Our biggest guiding factor is our Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And really the key points that we're going to hit on tonight are that free appropriate public education, looking at that we have to serve students who are eligible or have a potential disability to do child find, which is talking about making sure that we have an evaluation process or an assessment system to help us program for students. What does specially designed instruction look like? And then also, what are those protections for the parents and the child's rights within special education? So as we start to think about who makes up a team, you'll often get calls from the school saying, we need to maybe come in, we need to wrap our arms around this young student or this young adult. Will you join the problem solving or wraparound supports? So really thinking about, you'll have an education teacher. You may have a sending school district case manager. So as you guys heard about with the new redesign, we are having many students move in from outside of our region. So we that are new to Bismarck Public Schools. So at any point, that sending school district can definitely be part of the team or maintain team membership if they're looking at reintegration or going back into that home. A student's parents or guardians, who is that designated what we call legal decision maker, the student, if appropriate, most of the time, students by law have to be invited starting at the age of 16 because of transition planning. But up until that point, you can have a student as a team member at any point in time. So that's really up to that team's decision-making process. You find it more at middle and high than what you do at elementary. Special education teachers, clinicians, we may have our physical therapists, our occupational therapists, our board certified behavior analysis. We do have 2 that our district currently employs, but you may have outside providers who are BCBAs through Ann Carlson or some of the outside organizations. And then what we say is speech pathologists or speech language pathologists or SLPs. And then any transition agency representation. So we might have voc rehab at the table, developmental disabilities, West Central Human Service Zone, or any outside provider that that parent has signed a release for. So that really makes up the team membership to help wrap around that student. As often as the student needs. So that is a lot of schedules. So you may have them, you have to have them yearly for your annual review, but we have some students in the district that we meet weekly on. Some that as programming starts to get better or the data is showing growth, then you might go every 2 weeks, every 3 weeks, a month, quarter, just depending on what that team feels like. Students who tend to have more behavioral needs will have more frequent meetings. Yeah, of course, please do. Yep, it could be. Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, so there's a couple pieces. You have to by law invite the legal decision maker. So that's the person who owns the, or not owns, sorry, who still has the guardianship established before termination of parental rights. Now, at any point, that foster care parent can be invited by either the parent or the school district, as long as there's a release of information signed. And that's a piece that you can really rely on, like the case manager, the path worker, whoever you're working with, to say, we really need that foster care voice at the table so that you can get invited to those meetings. So I would reach out to either that school case manager if you know, or the social worker at the school or your foster care worker. Yep. So it'd be a Bismarck Public School release of information. And then because it's educational, the guardian would have to sign it, not the custodian. So that happens, that gets confusing a lot because with special education, and as I talked about the IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, it identifies that parent as the legal decision maker unless rights or until rights have been terminated. So custodian is like outside of the school day. The legal decision maker is still within the school or the parents' rights. Yep. Yeah. And oftentimes, like you might get information or a questionnaire that's sent to both the foster care parent and the bio parent. And you don't need a release to disclose any of that from your perspective to the school. If there's like, how's home performance? Is the student's stamina decreasing at night? Are the behaviors increasing? Like all of those questions. So, yeah. And sometimes the school doesn't even know, depending on that the student's in a foster care placement. So that sometimes where we see breakdown between, so this might get too far in the weeds, but we have a system that will, the county workers should be identifying, like filling out that the students in foster care, oftentimes they're supposed to get it turned around within 30 days. I think we're averaging about 4 months out from placement. So sometimes there's a little bit more of a delay. So just reaching out to the school to let them know that you have a student in your home is exceptionally helpful. Yeah. And we sometimes call those handle with care emails too, where if you email that school secretary and just say handle with care, got a student who was placed over the night in an emergency placement in my home, just FYI, then at least we know we can treat a little bit differently or just spread a little bit more love around that day. Yep. Yeah. Yeah, and oftentimes, like we established that process was Burley County Sheriff's Department. So they'll also send those emails to the school secretaries that will say, handle with care, something like there's no details, but just handle with care. And then we can get wraparound services put in place right away. All right. So really, and this leads right into it, your role as a foster care parent, if for some reason you've been given the rights, then you can definitely be that legal guardian. However, oftentimes those rights aren't. And so really know that your role is being present and advocating for that student's needs and what you're seeing as being really beneficial for the student's programming. You can participate and attend those IEP meetings. So just keep that in mind and work with the school to get whatever done that you need to. But essentially parents can say that they can say this person can be at the table or this person can't. So just depending on those situations. All right. So as we talk about, and I didn't get into the evaluation process because this was really around the IEP process. So there's a whole child find intervention phase. We call it our problem solving phase also within the school system. So typically what would happen is if concerns start to pop up, we start to wrap around supports for that student, talk about what additional plans do we need to put in place. And then if those plans or interventions aren't working, then we dig deeper and probably will go into what we call our evaluation phase. And then at that point, we look at eligibility guidelines. All of Bismarck Public Schools eligibility for special education guidelines and worksheets can be found under BP or Bismarck Public Schools Department Special Education eligibility guidelines. And so you can go look at those, but we have 13 different category areas Most commonly, OHI, other health impairment, SLD, specific learning disabilities, SLP or SLI as speech language impairments. So those might be some of your more frequent or high flyers, and also ED is emotionally disabled or emotional disabilities. So if a student is found eligible for special education, then we really roll into the IEP. And what you guys will find is a very bare bones sample of what forms will look like. So in North Dakota, we call it the TINET system. And so outside of schools on the reservation, you will find the same template within North Dakota. And that's what this biggest packet looks like. It says the Individualized Education Plan, so that you could look at what do the sections look like. And so that first one that we're talking about, the present level of performance, and then you'll also, I should add, the handout that's the most colorful. There's a lot of components of an IEP. These are your big five for that. And so that present level of performance can be found on page 3 of 14. That really starts to go through what's that student's cognitive ability, their academic performance, the behavioral, their health, medical, emotional, ecological status. As kids get older, we have transition components that look at independent living, vocational, employment in those areas, and it's really a snapshot of where that student is currently performing. So we'd hope that every year there's changes. So it should be a changing document, that information in kindergarten isn't still there in 5th grade. That's where a lot of IEP time is spent, talking about how is that student currently performing. Then moving into our goals section, you'll find the goals on page 8 of 14. And that's really when we talk about specially designed instruction. So what are we going to do differently for this student to help the student grow the skills or grow in their weak areas so that their weaknesses turn into their strengths? And so you'll find that we talk about what's their intent or purpose. Why are we picking these specific areas? Diving into what are we going to look like from a behavior, like what's that behavior going to look like? The student will read 5th grade material and answer who, when, where, what, why questions. The ending level, where do we want them after a year of these services put in place? And then what does that instruction look like through the characteristics of services? So if you want to scroll a little bit throughout, we covered those, so you can keep scrolling. A lot of times we look at the goals being around SMART goals, or what seems specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and relevant, and timely for the student. So we don't want anything that the student can't reach when we're looking at those goals also. But this is really where the heart of it is, and if we have a lot of meetings where we're coming back and revising, it's probably feeling like either the goals section or our accommodations modifications, which is our next section to cover, is really where we have to dive deeper into. And so along with those services, we also have to consider what services are appropriate for the student. What do we need to have put in place? And so there's a lot of related services. And the service page that can be considered is section J, which is page 14. Well, a snapshot printed. Bethany probably could be doing a way better job at this. Page 11 of 14. And so that's where we outline, does the student need transportation? Does the student need assistive technology? Does the student need parent? Like when we talk about the parent counseling, it isn't therapeutic counseling, it's like training around assistive tech or training around how can the student's physical therapy or occupational therapy be implemented in the home. What do nursing services look like for that student? So those are all a wide range of what could related services or supports look like for students. All right, so the last section, and they're not really in the same order in the IEP, but you will find them, are accommodations and modifications on the top of 9, page 9 of 14. Modifying is really changing the standards that we expect for the student. So we're changing what we're thinking that student needs to learn. Accommodations are we're changing the how the learning is going to happen. So we still expect that student to reach all of the learning levels. It's just that we might have a grip on a pencil. We may have closed notes. We may have highlighted notes for the student. So accommodations, we do not change what the student's learning, we change how the student's learning. Modifications, we change what the student's learning. So a lot of times, students who have an intellectual disability may have more modifications than a student who has a learning disability. It might be performing where they just need accommodations to like their learning. They may need a quieter environment. They may need to be closer to the teacher, some of those things. So those are also terms that you'll hear often that people can like switch around. So some people may call an accommodation a modification. So it's important to remember accommodations are how you're learning. The modifications are you're changing your expectations on what that student's learning, which starts to impact students as they get closer to graduation and moving on. So, all right. And so some accommodations or modifications really can be around what scheduling look like, what seating look like, what do materials look like, instruction, and what does that student response look like. So one example, we have a kid taking an ACT right now where they really struggle with the visual motor processing. So all responses are oral, and then there's a scribe that's circling in the answer. So that's a student response accommodation. And it's an accommodation because we're just changing the how. We're not changing what that student needs to learn. So those are some things. And then finally that LRE. So we talk about LRE is the least restrictive environment. So where is the least intrusive place to educate that student? And so we really want that student in the classroom learning with their peers as often as they can. But as a student starts to display more behaviors, or they may be like really a wide range away from where that academic or that grade level is, you might find that student getting a little bit more into a higher LRE or out of the classroom more often. So that's really where we try to sometimes like the student may only be in the classroom for a half hour a day. That might be that student's LRE, the least restrictive environment. But then we have a transition plan to try to reintegrate maybe to 45 minutes, then maybe to an hour, then maybe to an hour and a half. You may have students who have, I might be a 9th grade student who I'm reading at the 4th grade level, and so I'm not in my English class, I'm in a core replacement. Then I'm out of that gen ed classroom into a special ed classroom, and then that will impact what that least restrictive environment looks like. So teams always want the student in the classroom with their peers as often as possible, but the kids' needs might be that they have to be away from their peers more than they are with their peers, but then there should always be a re-engagement or a transition plan back or working back to get with their students in that general education environment. So that's a lot of information thrown at you guys, and it's really like IEP 101 and 5 concepts. So what questions do you have? Yeah, so every school will have a way to call for assistance. in those situations so that newer buildings may have a button on the wall that they call and say requesting assistance, and then other teachers will come to help. Aid time would be designated on page, it's under the services page, so page 11 of 14. That'll outline, like, if there's an aide, if there's a teacher, what does that support look like? Yep. Did you have a question? No? Oh, I thought you were raising your hand. Removal, like worst case scenario would be that we use crisis prevention intervention and then have a physical restraint or an escort into a safer space. There's times where it's safer to leave the student in the classroom and remove the other peers versus trying to remove, so that student may stay and other peers move out of the room too. So those would be the ways to transport. Putting hands on kids is our last resort, but sometimes our only resort. So, and then there's a long documentation process and usually a meeting. That's when you'll start to get into multiple meetings if there's 1 or 2 or 3 that are occurring. Like the quick button would be someone saying we request, a parent or guardian saying we want to request testing. We recommend going through the process, so it would be starting off with that grade level PLC, our professional learning community coming together and saying this student showing some signs of struggle, here are some ways that we can wrap around. So the student might be in my 3rd grade class. As the 3rd grade teachers meet together, then they'll say, well, have you tried this or have you tried this? Then probably bringing a team together and saying, let's put in together what we call a individualized learning plan. Like if you're considering ED eligibility, emotional disabilities, you have to have 2 tried interventions before you can say that you've been through the process. Then let's say interventions aren't working, there's still more supports needed, then you're probably going to move into that assessment phase. So start to finish, when we start our profile, there's 3 steps to an assessment: the student profile, the assessment plan, and then the integrated written assessment report. And teams will have 45 days to complete that process. So it's usually a pretty lengthy process because what we have to ensure is that we're not having trauma, or we're not having the student's circumstances be confused with a disability. So, yeah. So what the school will be doing behind the scenes, should be, they should be doing data days every 6 to 8 weeks where you're running through every kid in that building. And then we have a tiering support, and it's called tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3. And you're taking all of those data pieces. And so usually we're looking at their MAP assessment, their AIMS assessment, their classroom performance. And we have a process of integrating all of that. It starts to calculate points, and then that will put kids into tiers. So as kids are moving from what we call our yellow tier into our red tier, the school should be reaching out and putting them through, like Title I is usually the first start. If you hear Title I reading intervention or Title I math intervention, or in schools that aren't Title I, if they have what we call lookalike programs, so I'll use Liberty as an example, they don't meet the Title I qualifications, but they'll have a reading teacher. And so once the kids start to move into that, that's considered an intervention. And so the process should be started. What we have to show on the back end is that through the evaluation process, that it's not due to a lack of exposure or due to attendance concerns or due to trauma. And so that's where sometimes it starts to get a little bit harder of, is this student just, they might be coming and they have missed 35 days of school. That isn't a disability. That wouldn't qualify for an IEP, because a disability would be that there's something impairing that student from learning other than environmental factors. So then what other extra supports can we wrap around? And that's really where reading and math intervention, the social worker, or behavior specialist in a building will start to put in supports too. Yep. So the IEP, as we talked about, a key piece is that specially designed instruction. So that's why you would qualify for special education, is that you need some sort of teaching or reteaching that's going to help you gain a strategy or get some skills that are working. Like, you can never fix a disability, right? But they're going to help you gain that skill in order to work with your disability. And so a 504 would be that you just need an accommodation, that there's no specially designed instruction. So I'll give you an example. I might have ADHD, and just having a seat up front in the classroom, that might be a 504. Now, if I need teaching around a strategy of like every 10 seconds I need to be cued to re-engage into my work, that might be an IEP, because there's a teaching component, where the 504 is just accommodations, supporting the student through their learning. So that's the difference. Yeah, at any point in time, if you feel like that 504 isn't adequate or additional accommodations need to be occurring, just reach out to the team and request a meeting. Or if like you feel like the accommodations aren't working and you want to reconsider, does that student qualify for maybe a learning disability in math, or is there another health impairment that's impacting? That would go through the evaluation process. I would really encourage you to bring that team back together and start wrapping and problem solving around what are next steps. So when you talk about like a couple wonders that I would have that start to impact is work getting turned in on a frequent basis? Where are those standards grade basic, like grading? So you have a standard, and then you have like a 1, 1.5, 2, 2.5, 3. Is there just one area that's pulling down, or is it all areas that are pulling down? Because if, let's say it's just multiplication that's maybe pulling it down, that accommodation could be a calculator, but then we're not getting that work turned in on a frequent basis in order to have enough points that are pulling together. So those would be all things that I would dig into to see what are those impeding factors. And at any point, a parent can say, I just want the assessment, I want the evaluation, and the school district would have to move forward with that evaluation to rule out any disability. It's a wide variety of all. So you might get a doctor's diagnosis, like let's say you're considering an emotional disability. One of our guidelines say that you have to have a recent diagnosis from a medical provider that might say ADHD or bipolar. There's tons of different. So it might be that piece of information, but there might be then a school psychologist coming in, doing a cognitive, doing some behavior rating scales. You might have a special education teacher that's doing some observations, classroom teachers that are giving reports on how is that student performing. And so it's really, that's the second prong of the evaluation is, well, who's making up that assessment plan? What's their roles and responsibilities within that assessment plan? And then what's our timeline to get it done? So it can be anyone, really. Gen Ed, special ed. It could be the social worker doing an intake process, a counselor that may be bringing information to the table, your school psychologist who might be doing more of that cognitive, the special education teacher doing achievement. And those will be all areas that would have to be considered for eligibility guidelines. Yeah, so in a real great world that's all working well, right? Like when the whoever's registering that student, typically if it's the foster care case manager or whoever, will bring in all that student's paperwork into registration. So it's right there ready to go. We do have, after the registration has been completed, because everything's on a statewide system outside of the reservations, and that paperwork tends to be really delayed, is that within 24 hours, we will have that student added and then be able to pull them up in what we call our TINET or our IEP system. So we should have then the information. Typically the social worker or counselor in the school will be calling and requesting, is there additional information? Is there behavior information that that student, has the student been expelled? Some of those components also. And hopefully within by 3 days, that student's in school so that we're not having an undue delay for them. Worst case scenario is that that student starts by day 3 and we don't have any information on that student. And then that tends to be where we don't have the programming in place because we just don't know what that programming looks like to be supporting the student. So that would be, if it's us sending a student, like we just had a student that moved to Minot, that one of the support staff went up and trained staff in Minot. And so like that was a pretty intensive situation where we got a sub to come in and allow that to happen. Other school districts have done that for us too, if there are significant plans in place. So those are all transition services. Now with the virtual world, you just click on a Teams link, right? And there they are. So that's another option. And I think even if it's just that phone call to let them know that they're now, what I was gonna say was just to give them, hey, now we're moving from like the students in a safe home, because you do approach kids a little bit differently where you're concerned about like we need to get them safe or feeling comfortable for those first 2 hours before we can start those academic learning pieces. And if we know they're entering our building already safe, then we can like start to add those supports at a quicker level. And so I think that's a piece of it also. And a lot of the kids are scoring in like that what we call our tier 2 or intervention level, that they're in some sort of title program, they're in some sort of math program, and it's just that we haven't been able to get a parent in. Like we can't move forward with an evaluation until that parent signs. And so that's oftentimes what happens is that until that county worker is in there saying part of your action plan is that you're going to engage in this evaluation process. So teams might have tried and you don't know that either. Yeah. Elementary school, just to add a little bit to that, I would go classroom teacher. If you're not hearing much, go to the principal. Middle school, I'd start off with your counselor and then shooting an email maybe to like their home-based teacher. If you're not getting any results, I'd go right to the principal within a week. And then high school, I would go counselor. Those are based typically off of alphabet. And then your assistant principal at the high schools or your deans will have alphabets. And that's all on that school's website. And so those would be the first two. And yeah, so that characteristics of service will be really an indicator of where should those services be taking place. And when I talk about that LRE, if services are getting pushed into the classroom versus the kid being pulled out, you're going to have a lot stronger collaboration. Now, considerations that may be coming in there is if the student really struggles attending and distractions are occurring all around that student, it might be better to pull out. So there's reasons why those decisions would be made. But if you're seeing that piece of, hey, it would be really nice for this collaboration or that characteristics of service is a great spot just to keep your eye on if you're in those meetings. But hopefully through PLCs or professional learning communities, specialists do join grade levels depending on what that building and how often, and are they going in just for the students on their caseload or are they designated to a grade level too? So those are all collaborative efforts that are made. But yes, collaboration is going to move that student much further. And trauma can manifestate itself or look so much like different disabilities and emotional disability, a learning disability and intellectual disability, that those are all pieces that are so crucial for those evaluation teams to roll out. Yeah. So if you feel like that, like if you're, depending on what the need is, if you're thinking reading, math, or academic based, all of it with the social emotional, you may be at the point where you're just going to request an evaluation of like, I have a lot of concerns. I feel like we've been in the intervention process. The students maybe been in the home for 6 months, or you've established that safe 2 years, established that safe boundary guidelines. Then it might be, hey, I want an evaluation for special education consideration. That might be the next step. Every process will look a little bit different because it is designed for that student's individual needs. And I would say continue to reach out anytime to the school staff that you feel like additional support or handle with care is needed for the young adolescents and children in your homes.
Okay. Yes, I've got a list. So first thing is, if you're here tonight and you'd like to join the association, because you can get all of your virtual in-person learning credits, whatever we have to do, the 6 hours that you need to be in person, $20 is the annual membership. And right there, Michaela will take your money. It's a great deal. We track your training for you. So if you sucked at that during the year, we've got you covered at the end of the year for your licensing. Door prize. We have a door prize. Do that next, and then I'll wrap up. I'm gonna go. Who's that? Gordy. I was like, is that what that says? You're the winner. It's not a trip to Mexico. Dues are only $20. So we appreciate you guys showing up monthly and interacting in this way. The support and the network is really important. I think that there are hard days, and there's a lot of learning going on when you're a foster parent. Even when you're 5 years in, you're still learning how to navigate some of these situations that you've never encountered before. And so just a reminder along the way that we want to be kind and respectful to one another. Maybe we should have a handle with care tag on our Facebook page. If you're having one of those moments and you feel like you need to vent, maybe that is a good tag to put on, and we can translate that over into our Facebook group, because I think sometimes it's really easy to read somebody's thing and be in a spot emotionally yourself and take that thing to mean something that it doesn't really mean, and take it out of context or interpret it in a certain way. So caring confrontation, please, is the reminder around that, that we want to be here to support one another. And part of that is sometimes I'm frustrated about this. Just another thing to keep in mind, we're teaching our kids this, but be constructive in your venting. That's probably maybe the message is, go ahead and vent, we're here for that, but be constructive and kind in your venting. So with that, we'll see you next month, second Tuesday of May. We're going to have Haven Hills board members here to talk a little bit about what a foster care community could look like in our community. See you guys.